With Session Update, I'm Julie Bartkey. We are breaking away from the Viking Stadium hearing from last week to get you up to date on the latest stadium news. After a day of frustration and what GOP leaders call misinformation, they sat down with the governor and DFL leaders this afternoon to discuss their latest proposal to include the stadium in a bonding bill. The original idea was for an open-air stadium, but a roof may be required under the criteria for a facility to be built using general obligation bonds. So for more on today's meeting and what's next in the process, here are comments made by the GOP following that meeting.
Well, thanks everybody for hanging out. We had some discussions with the governor with respect to the bonding bill as well as the Viking Stadium in our discussions with Leader Thiessen and in the Senate, also with Governor and with Senator Bach. And the discussions were very focused for today, and they just dealt with the proposal that we began yesterday that said that we're trying to find a solution to the stadium issue. One of the issues that we're trying to solve is the funding issue, and the focus of the discussion from yesterday was a very general one on starting out on would the use of general obligation bonds be appropriate for the stadium. That began as just kind of a very general discussion point that might be helpful for us to get done and to get out. Would that be helpful? We've first began talking with nonpartisan research to see if this in fact was bondable as a project. That in fact is the case because of the public ownership. The next step was to see if there was appropriate appetite within the caucuses to use this as a solution, that there was an interest. And yesterday we met with the House caucus in the morning and Senate caucus in the afternoon, and unfortunately somewhere in between word of that discussion got out, and then the discussions from yesterday kind of went off from there into many probably errant directions. So the discussions today with the governor were focused, and Senator Bach and Representative Thiessen were focused very generally or very specifically, on one question, and that was, can general obligation bonds be a solution or a partial solution to the stadium issue? I think that the answer to that was yes, they would be interested in looking at that. We talked as a possibility. We also need to talk with the Vikings to see if there's an appetite to move forward with this as a possible solution. We have said that we could pay for the infrastructure costs with general obligation bonds. We now believe that that is the case. We have been given information this morning from MMB that it may require a roof if we are to use general obligation bonds, so that is a change, and we are verifying that at this time. So that's another change from before. We're looking at moving forward in a productive manner. We're trying to find a solution that the legislature can agree to, that the governor can sign. We hope that this is fruitful. We want to talk with the governor and the leaders. We would like to have talked with them yesterday, but before word got out, unfortunately, that happened. And also the Vikings, to see if this is a possible solution. If so, we want to continue working on it, and if it's not productive and it's not helpful, then we can move on to other solutions to try to get done and get out. But right now, from what we have heard, general obligation bonds are appropriate and usable. They could comprise the infrastructure costs plus possibly additional costs related to the facility. That is appropriate. And we wanted to see if the governor was interested in that. His response was that he was looking for solutions just like we are. If this is productive to move forward, he is certainly interested in doing that. We talked about how that might occur. We're going to get back with some of our fiscal staff to look at some numbers and also to see if this is a possibility for moving forward. I would say that there is general interest in both the Senate and the House Republican caucus for moving forward in this direction. It might be helpful, but we want to make sure that the Vikings say that this is a viable option and will move forward, and the governor says that this is a viable option and will move forward before we invest any more time and discussion within this. If it's not acceptable, then we'll find another solution to this issue moving ahead. But our talks were very direct, cordial, and productive along those lines, and very, very focused on, is general obligation bonds a way to help us get to a solution or not?
So are you saying that the Rosen landing plan is out and you're finally looking for something else?
No, Don, the Rosen and landing plan is on the floor in the House, and we are certainly looking for ways to get out of Dodge, definitely, and to get done. But we want to conclude the session successfully, and we think that this might help us do that, and that's the purpose for the discussions. And generally around the use of general obligation bonds in a bonding bill that also includes statewide infrastructure, that might help us get the support that we need from the caucuses to move this forward. And also, does that have is there an appetite on behalf of the governor and the Vikings to do so? And that's what we want to find out.
Well, there is no appetite. The governor says no, the Vikings say no, and Minneapolis says no. Am I not understanding this correctly?
Well, I think that they were responding yesterday to a lot of information that was distributed in the press that was incorrect, and certainly they were looking at pieces of paper that were not accurate. And that's our question for the Vikings and for the governor is there an appetite for this as a solution? And obviously we need to talk about the details of that, and that's what we started to do today with the governor.
So they're open to that now, looking at a stadium without a roof in which the state pays all the infrastructure?
The governor is very supportive of a roof structure immediately, not roof ready, and from what we understand, that may be required if we use general obligation bonds anyway.
Is that because it would be a publicly owned building that would have to be available for use year-round, and that's why it would need that for bonding?
Yes.
What about this idea, first of all, using general fund money that the governor says he's adamantly opposed to and says that's sort of a criteria for this? The other thing is turf down, and explain a little bit, is there any movement on that particular issue?
Well, I think the emphasis was on infrastructure costs, and that could we package this as part of a statewide infrastructure bonding bill? And when people ask me about that, I say, well, this is how we pay for infrastructure projects all across the state, many of which are designed to help private companies. And so this would be very similar to that, and we've been talking with the folks, with the staff, and to find out exactly how what the authorization for those bonds exactly are. And so that's what we're trying to find out right now. But from general fund use portions of this is how we fund that. We would also point out that the other bill also does have interactions with the general fund as well. And our members are really looking for solutions. I think most of the fans that I talk to and people at Cub Foods really don't know or care about GO and GF. They want to go Vikings, and they want a solution.
Would you only be building sewers and roads and that sort of thing like you were discussing yesterday? And what would the cost be? I know yesterday you did not have a dollar amount for the state. What are you looking at now?
Well, we're trying to get those figures, and we're looking at the Vikings. Generally, it's considered about 20 to 25% of total construction costs. So it'd be north of $250 million. So we're getting, just with that number, we're getting very close to the opening number for the Viking Stadium previously. So we're very close to that number. And also, we would be looking at a roof structure as well. So we would be looking at that additional costs for that as well. But generally speaking, we're looking at about a quarter of the total costs. And right now, we're just saying, you know, how much money would that be to this particular project, and we're getting the details on that. But it's getting to the point where, you know, it's 25 to 30%, several $100 million just in that piece. So obviously, it's a credible amount of money. It's a different way to pay for it, and those are the discussions that we're currently having. Whether there's an appetite on the part of the governor or the Vikings to move forward with that is what we're finding out now. And if there's not, that's okay.
If there is, can you give us a roadmap of what happens if there is the appetite to move forward? Does this go through the committee process? Are you in favor of a special session to deal with this? Or is there something that can be amended onto the bills that are on the floor? Or how does this work?
Well, from a process standpoint, I mean, obviously the first part is are we open, and what is the process? We would, the bill itself would be very simple. It would just be an amendment to the existing bonding bill, plus some enacting language that we would probably be required for that. So it would move through. But the basics of the bill are very similar to the existing bill, and those pieces and parts have been through the committee process and have been vetted. This is just looking at a different funding mechanism. We would be open to discussions with regards to committees and down the road. But right now, we're just at the point of, is this viable with the governor? Is this viable with the Vikings to move forward?
Yesterday, it seemed to be that the beauty of your plan, as you saw it, was that you could reduce the cost of the stadium by eliminating the roof. The state could put in less money by just paying for infrastructure and turf down. But now with the roof back in play, the Vikings in Minneapolis is still going to look for a greater portion of this project, it seems. Or do you not just even know what those numbers are?
Yeah, Tom, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up. We did not say that that was no roof. What we said was we're infrastructure. That's the piece that we want to pay for, and the Vikings, you know, would, in the city of Minneapolis and the partners can decide. So we would just have a very clean way of looking at what our investment was. So that was the generation of the discussion from yesterday is how could we cap that, and how could we provide a very good and clean deal to finance this with general obligation bonds, which is the way we pay for all our infrastructure through the bill, the bonding bill, and could this be part of a bigger bonding bill? So our initial answers are yes.
To use bonding, now the Vikings don't have that option of not putting a roof on. Am I understanding this correctly?
Or will the state pay for it?
That portion of that looks to be, we're exploring that with the bonding bill, but it looks to be the answer to that question is yes, it would require it.
They said yesterday very clearly they were, it was a dead deal if this was a deal. Obviously, the local park paying a lot of money. What's the deal with that?
We are talking with the city of Minneapolis, and we want to make sure that they are part of any discussions and moving forward because they're an important partner in this with the city. So again, just testing if this has legs, if this is viable, naturally want to be part of the discussion moving forward.
Mr. Speaker, can you respond? The governor called this a fiasco, and he said Republicans are to blame. You and your leadership are to blame.
I think Representative Dean has laid out a path forward with positive solutions. I think part of this was maybe not having all the information before commenting, which happens around here a lot, especially get towards the end of session. People are either malnourished, you know, underslept, under maybe you know, having a broad concept of what actually is in. I think Representative Dean has laid forward, again, it's a path forward, and today's today, yesterday was yesterday. I think maybe now that there's a better understanding, or at least the components part.
The governor still said you're blowing this up. Is it a path forward?
Well, again, I don't think I've spent as much time on anything else other than the stadium this session. I think I've been very clear that we do believe that they're an asset, that we do believe this is important for the state of Minnesota. So I'm not going to characterize what's been said in the past. I'm going to compliment Representative Dean on finding a path forward.
What was the governor's reaction just now when you presented?
On a path forward that actually has a positive solution at the end, rather than looking at what may or may not have come out. Unfortunately, you guys are really good at your job and finding out information, but maybe not having all the facts. So I'll let the governor comment on his own on what he thought the discussions were in there. I thought they were, to Representative Dean's point, very fruitful, direct, and possibility-based rather than, and outcome-based rather than maybe some of the other comments.
So have you reached out to the Vikings and have you reached out to the city of Minneapolis? And if so, when do you expect these discussions to begin with those entities?
Today and today.
When are you going to release the information that you say we're misreporting, or the fact that everything's not, the full picture isn't there? When is that information going to actually get released?
Well, we're still waiting for a lot of information to come back from fiscal staff and from MMB on the availability of this. But Jody will walk through just kind of some broad outlines of this as a mechanism to the press corps very shortly.
Are you proposing to add any additional revenue?
Why this is happening on May 2nd? I mean, we've been at this for 15 months. Now we're doing all this research. Why now?
Well, I think that this is there was a stumbling block, I believe, along the way with trying to get done with this project with the revenue source, and also there's a great need across the state of Minnesota for some infrastructure upgrades in a bonding bill, and so we said that there may be an opportunity to merge those two needs into a new opportunity. And again, just testing whether or not that this can be part of a solution with the governor and with the other stakeholders. So that's what we're trying to do today.
Are you proposing to add any additional revenues to the general fund to cover the additional debt service this would cost? And what would be the total size of the bonding bill that you would anticipate after if you do this approach?
We have, we're still looking at the overall size of the bonding bill. We passed a $96 million bonding bill last year that was heavily weighted towards infrastructure. There's a great appetite for that on the part of the caucus members from both the House and Senate for a statewide infrastructure bill. The governor is higher, and this would be additional, but we don't have a cap number on that yet, Lori. And we're still working on that.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Sales tax revenue. Are the Republicans prepared to pay for stadium income and sales tax revenue?
You're not going to answer that? Are you going to pay Bill's question? Are you good with sales tax that you're just asking?
I said that GO bonds are paid primarily with income tax and sales tax revenue. Are Republicans willing to pay for a stadium with income and sales tax revenue?
I'm sorry, Bill, you said that GO bonds are
It's general fund money. Most of the general fund comes from income and sales tax revenue. Are you ready to repay those bonds with income and sales tax revenue?
Yeah, and I think we had this the question earlier about the use of general fund for GO bonds, and you know, the answer to that is that in both proposals there is general fund interaction, and in this is the way we pay for infrastructure all across the state of Minnesota. And that is an issue that we have to grapple with and discuss with the caucuses.
That's not
yes.
Against me.
From the use of general fund money does back up GO bonds. The general fund money is also used in the other bill.
Would you provide an additional revenue source? Can you say what happens?
The governor and DFL leaders say this latest proposal has many questions attached to it and continue to look for an up or down vote on the bills that were vetted in committee and are ready for floor action. So for more on their perspective on today's meeting, here is the governor and Senator Tom Bach and Representative Paul Thiessen.
Well, we, as you know, just had a meeting with the legislative leaders from the Republican caucuses. They presented the kind of general concept that was talked about yesterday. I think there's some understanding that a roof needs to be part of the deal. Very, very little details, lots of questions open. I think the main point to be made is that there really is only one legitimate stadium plan that's been assembled and put forward so far. That is the plan that is sitting on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. That's been through the committee process, the public hearing process that's been vetted, excuse me, and you know, that's I think still a plan that we need to take we need to move forward on, and I still believe we should be taking a vote on that plan. The plan that the Republicans came in with, again, very undefined. We're still willing to consider the options, but I think there's a lot of very open questions about the reality of this plan, and it's really going to be up to the Republicans as they move forward to kind of define it further and see if there is some reality here. But what we know right now is that there is a plan that we know can work. It's the plan sitting on the floor of the House and the Senate, and I hope that we can work productively to move forward to a speedy resolution of the session.
Well, I would renew my request for a vote on the bill that's in front of the State Senate on the floor. It's been through 5 committee hearings in the Senate, had bipartisan votes in every committee. And to bring in a proposal like this that totally changes the funding mechanism from an appropriation bond to a general obligation bond this late in the game, in the final days of the session, it is going to require a great deal of vetting whether the use of general obligation bonds are even appropriate here. There is a question. General obligation bonds require a public purpose, and there is a serious question whether a private tenant, the anchor tenant, can enter into an exclusive 40-year lease of a public building and have that still meet the general purpose requirements under the Constitution for general obligation bonding. So there are some serious questions, I think, that need to be asked about their proposal. I think it's awful late in the game probably to get some of those answers before this session adjourns. So I just would again request of Senator Senjum that the bill that's on the floor, that's been developed in a bipartisan way and voted for in a bipartisan way, that be taken up for a vote tomorrow when the Senate convenes.
Well, I would have greatly preferred that the events of the last 48 hours have been communicated to us in advance, but you know, it is what it is. We did raise, as both Representative Thies and Senator Box said, the request that the Senate and the House vote now on the bill that is on the floor, and we didn't get a positive response from them for that request. So, you know, we are where we are. They're in the majority. They control the floor. They control the agenda. They have a majority of the votes. So, you know, I want to see a stadium that's structurally sound and financially sound that'll put thousands of people to work and keep the Minnesota Vikings here. And, you know, if it means continuing to work and look at another possibility, then certainly willing to do that. We've made it very clear it has to be vetted by our experts, by Ted Mondale and by his consultants, and by the House and Senate, the DFL, as well as the Vikings. So, you know, there's a long way to go with this and not much time, but, you know, if it's something that has even a remote possibility, we're going to make every effort to find a successful resolution to this session.
Governor, does the use of general obligation bonds violate one of your cardinal principles that you had stated, no general fund tax dollars in this project?
Well, it's cardinal rule that they stated as well. I mean, we all agreed on that last fall. So, I mean, you have to ask them, you know, why the reversal, but, you know, that's for them to be responsible for.
Governor, now that you've heard more about it, do you still think it's harebrained and absurd as some of the other things you used to try?
Well, I think the stadium, I think the roof will be required on the stadium, which puts it back in a realm of reality. You know, the fact is, you just said that, you know, we've all said no GO bonds, and no, because they involve general fund tax dollars to pay off. I mean, you know, I guess, again, that's a question for the Republicans, you know, why the reversal? I don't understand what the reasons were behind it, but again, the point is, we are where we are today in this moment in time. I don't recant anything I said before. I meant every word of it. But from this point forward, you know, we got thousands of jobs and the future of the Vikings at stake. I'm not going to let my personal feelings for how other people conduct themselves get in the way of trying to get a resolution that's going to be beneficial to Minnesota.
So are you going to get back to them with some type of answer if you support it or you oppose it?
Oh, we made it clear. Well, we said we will support working together to see if there's, you know, if this is a valid proposal. They acknowledge themselves that it hasn't been vetted. We don't even have the details. So we are certainly committed, the DFL in the Senate, DFL House, my administration, to exploring with them in a good faith way, sincere way. You know, let's see what their merit to this proposal or not. And you know, as I say, it already got a roof on, put it back in the realm of reality as a people's stadium that could be used year round. So we'll see if it can continue to improve. I don't know if you want to comment.
Well, I mean, the bottom line, there's no there yet. I mean, it's very clear that there's no details to this proposal, and Representative Dean himself admitted that there's more questions than answers on this. I think the issue Representative or Senator Bach raised, and there's many other issues about the use of GO bonds that have to be answered, and you know, we're 5 days from adjourning here. You know, as the governor said, had this been vetted 3 days ago, or 3 days into session instead of 3 days after the self-imposed adjournment date, it's a different issue. But you know, we're continuing willing to work to move forward. But again, there is a legitimate vetted proposal sitting on the floor of the House and the Senate, and that's the way we ought to be moving forward here.
Did they say how long they'd be willing to stick around to work on this and flesh out these details and vet this?
You know, they didn't answer much in the way of what the process would be. Clearly, there has to be some kind of public process and public input here, and they didn't have any indication of where they wanted to go with this. You know, I think, no, the answer to your question is no.
Did they offer any explanation as to why they're taking this step to introducing this plan?
You know, not particularly that I can recall. I mean, you know, they're, you know, I don't know. They didn't really.
What do you think?
So, you know, I can't give you any explanation about why, after 6 months of pretty detailed discussions that folks were involved in, you know, authored by the Republican caucuses moving forward, why this idea suddenly appears after this self-imposed adjournment date. And, you know, quite honestly, why, you know, we don't know when it would have appeared had it not leaked out previously. I mean, they clearly weren't ready to go with this proposal, even though we're after the adjournment date. So you'd have to ask them why it took so long.
But they said they wouldn't go ahead with this unless you and the Vikings thought it was worth pursuing. If not, they would drop it. Do you think it's worth pursuing?
It's absolutely worth pursuing. I mean, again, because I want to find a solution. Whether there's any, you know, viability here or not, I can't say. And I made it clear we have to do the due diligence, and that was performed over months with the current proposal that's on the House and Senate floors, which is why that's the one that ought to be dealt with, and we ought to have an up or down vote on both the House and Senate floors on the proposal that has been carefully constructed, that has been vetted, that's been questioned appropriately every which way through 7 legislative hearings. And instead they're going to replace it with something that they haven't even formulated yet, that hasn't been checked out, that hasn't been vetted. And as far as I know, the Vikings haven't signed off on. I don't know about the city of Minneapolis. So, you know, to throw all the, you know, deck of cards up in the air 2 days after they were supposed to have adjourned, you know, is pretty incredible. But again, my goal is to reach a solution, and however we can responsibly work out a solution that's good for Minnesota, that's good for taxpayers, that's good for jobs, I'm certainly going to be willing to pursue that.
Last question.
Some repeatedly said that the charitable gaming revenues increase would be a diversion from the general fund to pay for this stadium, and they're arguing that this, using the general fund, the GO bonds, is just as normal.
Well,
and isn't it more simple than?
You know, this proposal has been in the works now. How long is the session? For 3 months. The last 2 months, this proposal came in its mostly present form to the House and the Senate. they're the ones who insisted on charitable gaming as the only alternative because there couldn't be a tax increase for anything and we couldn't use general revenue funds. So they've been, silent in terms of that all along. Representative Lanning's a member of the Republican caucus, so is Senator Rosen. And so now suddenly these objections that didn't exist for the last 2 months, I mean, it's really hard to take them seriously when they had plenty of opportunities 2 months ago and even to develop another proposal. If they say, well, we don't have the votes for charitable gaming, well then, tell us that 2 months ago and we could all work out something else. But the authors of the bill didn't even find out until yesterday that this whole switcheroo was being conceived and orchestrated. So, but we'll give it a chance. So I want to see the stadium, I want to see the jobs, I want to see the Vikings stay here, so we'll do our best.
Could you help me understand one thing, please? And I understand why you're saying that the GO bonds and the connection to general fund taxes, that they're breaking with their principles by proposing this. Why is that not the case? Are you not breaking with your principles as well by being willing to go down this path?
Well, what other source of public funding is there? I mean, the public dollars have to come from somewhere. We don't print them in the basement here. So, I mean, if somebody's got a better alternative and something, that's farther removed from any tax dollars, then we welcome suggestions. But again, this thing's been going on for 8 months. And this is what we were basically boxed into by the Republicans who said can't be a sales tax increase in Ramsey County. So, that knocks that one out, and it can't be this and it can't be that. So we're finally down to charitable gaming, and then we didn't hear anything about something wrong with that. I mean, some members think so, but in terms of the viability of the project, for the last 2 months we've had pieces of it whacked away. And then people say, well, you don't have adequate funding. Well, we don't have adequate funding because you knocked a third of it out of the box. But, the reality is nobody said anything about that, and now suddenly it's an issue. Last year, Speaker Zellers had a bill that would have expanded charitable gaming the same way, electronic pull tabs, and all the revenues would have gone to the charities. That didn't get anywhere. I mean, there was no support for that. There was no support for that this year. So I would say this is but for revenue. This is revenue that would not be available to the state for any purpose whatsoever, but for the fact of the stadium and the desire to find a viable and alternative funding source. And this is the best we can come up with. And again, if somebody's got a better idea, great. But then clue us in.
Thank you.
No, not at this point. No.
What's next?
Well, we said we'd, make Mr. Mondale and his team and Senator Baca and Representative Thiessen's team and their team, and they can meet now, they can meet this afternoon, this evening. I mean, time is of the essence, so we'll certainly wait to hear from them how they'd like to proceed. Thank you.
You were watching reaction to a meeting today following Tuesday's late game stadium proposal. There are no new meetings on the issue scheduled at this time, but of course we'll keep you posted as they take place.